Have you ever noticed how desire seems to have its own clock? That quiet pull between two people often feels stronger in the soft light of morning. But why? Is it biology, psychology, or something deeper about how our minds and bodies wake up to the world and to each other? In this exploration, we're diving into the surprising psychology of morning intimacy, how timing, hormones, and even emotions shape not just when we want connection, but how we experience it. Morning desire isn't random, it's a biological symphony. Testosterone peaks, dopamine rises, and oxytocin, the bonding hormone, nudges us toward closeness. Yet it's not just about hormones, it's about mindset. The morning brings a calm mind, less stress, and a sense of renewal. At the same time, timing shapes perception. When intimacy happens early, our brains often link it with comfort, trust, and emotional safety, creating a deeper connection that can last throughout the day. Have you ever woken up next to someone and felt that quiet, electric sense of connection? The kind that feels different from any other time of day. There's something about morning intimacy that feels softer, more natural, almost instinctual. It's as if the body knows something the mind hasn't quite caught up with yet. The light is gentler, the world quieter, and in that space between sleep and wakefulness, our desires often reveal their truest forms. But beneath that calm surface lies a fascinating psychological story, one where hormones, emotions, and timing come together in ways that can transform how we connect both physically and emotionally. Let's start with the simplest truth: our bodies are not static. They operate on rhythms, circadian rhythms that govern everything from when we feel hungry to when we feel desire. For men, testosterone levels are highest in the morning, typically peaking around the time the sun rises. That's one reason morning erections are so common. They're not just random events, but biological signals, reminders that the body is primed for intimacy. For women, the story is a little more layered. Estrogen and cortisol, which influence mood and arousal, also fluctuate throughout the day. In the morning, when stress levels are often lower and the brain hasn't yet been flooded by the demands of daily life, many women report feeling more emotionally open, and that openness can translate into a deeper kind of desire. What's fascinating is that morning intimacy isn't just about the body, it's about the brain. During the night, our minds go through cycles of deep rest and vivid dreaming, periods when emotional memories are processed and reinforced. When we wake up, we're often in a state of emotional recalibration. That's why the first hour of the day feels so tender. It's when the brain is most impressionable, when touch, warmth, and affection carry a heavier emotional weight. Studies have found that when couples share physical closeness in the morning, whether that's sex, cuddling, or even just lying together in silence, it releases oxytocin, the so called bonding hormone, at levels that can shape the emotional tone of the entire day. It's a simple act, but one that quietly strengthens trust and connection. Yet there's a psychological twist to this. Many people think of desire as spontaneous, something that strikes at random. But in truth, desire is deeply shaped by context, and timing is one of the most powerful contexts there is. Morning intimacy often feels less performative, less pressured. There's no buildup of stress, no long day of responsibilities weighing on your mind. It's raw, unfiltered, and grounded in presence. In the morning, your body hasn't yet built the emotional armor that it wears through the day. That vulnerability, the kind that comes when you're still half in a dream, creates space for genuine connection. Interestingly, neuroscience shows that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for judgment and self consciousness, is still waking up during early hours. This means that in the morning, people are often less inhibited, less likely to overthink or second guess themselves. In other words, you're more likely to experience desire as it naturally arises, without the layers of self awareness or performance anxiety that sometimes cloud it later in the day. It's intimacy before the world intrudes, pure, unguarded, and real. There's also something symbolic about morning connection. Psychologically, it represents renewal. Each day is a small rebirth, and when that day begins with closeness, the brain anchors that feeling of safety and belonging. Couples who share morning affection, not just sex, but even small gestures like touching, holding hands, or exchanging warmth, tend to report higher relationship satisfaction. It's not about frequency, it's about emotional rhythm. The consistency of waking up together, seeing one another in that quiet, honest light, signals to the brain that this bond is safe, familiar, and worth protecting. And it's not just about relationships, it's about how timing interacts with our biology to shape desire itself. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for pleasure and motivation, naturally spikes in the morning. This increase primes the brain for reward seeking behavior, whether that's food, movement, or connection. Pair that dopamine surge with elevated testosterone and oxytocin, and you have the perfect biochemical cocktail for intimacy. Your body, in essence, is inviting you to connect. But timing doesn't just affect physical readiness, it affects psychological receptivity. The brain in the morning is in what psychologists call hypnagogic transition state, where the boundary between subconscious and conscious thought is thinner. That's one reason why morning sex can feel more emotionally charged. It taps into deeper emotional layers that are often muted during the busy hours of the day. In that liminal space, touch becomes communication and connection feels almost sacred. What's also intriguing is how gender dynamics play into this. While men's bodies may be more physically ready in the morning, many women report that their desire grows in response to emotional connection. Morning intimacy, being slower and more relaxed, often provides that emotional foundation naturally. There's no rush, no need to perform, and the absence of external stressors creates a kind of psychological safety that enhances arousal. In fact, some research suggests that couples who engage in morning intimacy report not only better mood, but also higher productivity throughout the day. That's because sexual satisfaction releases endorphins and oxytocin, which together reduce anxiety and boost focus. So, yes, there's science behind that post morning glow confidence you might feel walking out the door. But the psychology of timing also has a more mysterious side. Our brains are highly associative, they link experiences to the emotions surrounding them. When intimacy happens consistently at a particular time, your brain begins to associate that time with pleasure and closeness. Over time, this conditioning can subtly shift your natural rhythm of desire. If mornings are a time when you often experience connection, your body starts to anticipate it, priming arousal before it even begins. It's a feedback loop between the body and the brain, reinforcing itself day after day. And that's part of the beauty of human sexuality. It's not fixed, it adapts, responds, and evolves based on experience and emotion. The timing of desire, like desire itself, is fluid. For some, the morning becomes a ritual of renewal. For others, it's a moment of grounding, a quiet, intimate reminder that beneath the chaos of daily life, connection still anchors us. Of course, not everyone feels desire in the morning, and that's just as natural. Our psychological associations with mornings vary widely. For some, it's a time of rush and responsibility. For others, it's a time of reflection and calm. The emotional meaning of the morning shapes how our bodies respond. People who associate mornings with peace and safety are more likely to experience desire than, while those who associate mornings with pressure may find their libido suppressed. It's a subtle but profound example of how the brain and body speak to each other in the language of emotion. And this brings us to something deeper, the link between timing and emotional intimacy. When intimacy happens at night, it often follows the release of tension. It's about letting go. Morning intimacy, however, is about beginning, about entering the day not as individuals, but as a unit. That shared moment becomes an emotional anchor, a reminder that connection isn't just about pleasure, it's about presence. There's also something primal about the morning light itself. From an evolutionary standpoint, early day bonding had survival advantages. Our ancestors who shared closeness in the morning reinforced social bonds before venturing into the uncertainty of the day. That sense of unity and reassurance was psychologically protective. Today, while we might not be fending off predators, the need for emotional security remains, and morning connection still fulfills that ancient psychological need. What's truly fascinating is how our sensory systems play into this timing. In the morning, touch sensitivity is heightened, skin temperature is slightly elevated, and the brain's reward centers are more responsive to physical contact. The scent of a partner, the warmth of skin, the softness of breath, all these sensory cues combine to create a kind of sensory intimacy that's uniquely powerful. It's a full body dialogue, one that bypasses words and speaks directly to the emotional brain. But perhaps the most overlooked aspect of morning intimacy is how it shapes self perception. When you begin your day with closeness, your brain encodes a sense of belonging. You're reminded subconsciously that you're desired, valued, and connected. That emotional reassurance translates into confidence, reduced social anxiety, and even better emotional regulation throughout the day. It's not just sex, it's psychological grounding. And if we step back and look at the bigger picture, morning intimacy becomes more than just an act. It's a statement about how humans balance biology and emotion. It's where chemistry meets connection, where timing amplifies tenderness. It shows that our desires aren't random impulses, they're deeply woven into our psychological rhythms. The more we understand those rhythms, the more intentional and fulfilling our connections can become. One of my favorite findings in this field comes from studies on emotional synchronization between couples. Researchers found that when partners share physical intimacy in the morning, their emotional states tend to synchronize for the rest of the day. That means if one partner starts the day feeling loved and secure, that emotional energy subtly transfers to the other. It's a phenomenon psychologists call emotional contagion, and it highlights how deeply interconnected our emotional and sexual worlds really are. In the end, the psychology of morning intimacy isn't just about when we have sex. It's about how timing influences meaning. It reminds us that desire is both biological and emotional, both personal and shared. The morning isn't just a time, it's a psychological state, a moment when the walls between the physical and the emotional are at their thinnest. When we choose to connect, then we're not just responding to hormones or habit. We're participating in a dance between biology and emotion that's as old as humanity itself. So the next time you wake up beside someone and feel that quiet pull, pay attention to it. That moment isn't just a coincidence, it's your mind and body aligning, inviting you into a kind of intimacy that's both deeply human and profoundly healing. Because sometimes the most meaningful connections don't happen under the cover of night. They happen in the first light of morning when desire and emotion rise together, reminding us that timing isn't just about when we love, but how deeply we do. Have you ever noticed how intimacy feels different depending on when it happens? There's something almost magical about those quiet morning moments. When sunlight filters through the curtains and the world hasn't quite woken up yet, the air feels softer, time slows down, and desire takes on a calmer, more natural rhythm. But what's really going on inside our bodies and minds during those early hours? Why does morning intimacy seem to carry a different kind of connection? One that feels more honest, more grounded, almost more human. The answer lies in a fascinating interplay between biology, psychology, and timing. When you wake up, your body is already in motion long before your mind catches up. While you sleep, your hormones don't rest, they're busy orchestrating a delicate chemical symphony. By dawn, testosterone peaks in both men and women. For men, that surge can increase arousal and energy levels. For women, it subtly enhances sensitivity and receptiveness. Add to that a rise in dopamine, the brain's reward chemical, and oxytocin, the hormone that fosters emotional bonding, and you have a body primed not just for sex, for closeness. Morning intimacy then isn't simply about desire, it's about connection at its most biologically aligned moment. But the real magic happens in the brain. During sleep, our emotional centers, the amygdala and hippocampus, process memories and emotions from the previous day. When we wake, our brains are in a more emotionally neutral state. We're less guarded, less analytical, and more open to affection. Psychologists call this the hypnopompic state, the transition from dreaming to wakefulness. In that half awake phase, the boundaries between emotion and sensation blur. Touch feels deeper, eye contact lingers longer, and connection feels more profound. It's the mind's way of reminding us that intimacy isn't just physical, it's emotional communication through touch. And if you think about it, it makes sense. At night, intimacy can sometimes carry the weight of the day. Stress, fatigue, arguments, deadlines, they all linger in the mind, dulling desire or making sex feel like something to check off a list. But in the morning, the psychological slate is clean. The brain hasn't yet been cluttered by responsibilities. That's why morning desire often feels spontaneous. It's the body leading and the mind following. You're not thinking about performance or how you look or what comes next. You're just present. And that presence is one of the most powerful aphrodisiacs there is. In fact, neuroscience shows that mindfulness and arousal are deeply intertwined. When people are fully in the moment, focused on sensation rather than outcome, the brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for self monitoring, quiets down. The same thing happens naturally in the morning. You're groggy, uninhibited, and a little dreamy. Your body is awake before your inner critic is. That's why morning intimacy often feels so natural. It's one of the few times when your biological and psychological rhythms are perfectly aligned for connection. But there's more beneath the surface. Hormonal peaks are just the starting point. What really sets morning intimacy apart is how it affects emotional bonding. Oxytocin levels rise significantly with physical touch, especially skin to skin contact. This isn't just romantic, it's deeply neurological. Oxytocin reduces the stress hormone cortisol, calms the nervous system, and creates a sense of emotional safety. When that happens at the very beginning of the day, it doesn't just make you feel closer in the moment, it actually sets the emotional tone for hours to come. Couples who start their day with touch, affection, or intimacy tend to report higher relationship satisfaction and even better communication throughout the day. It's almost as if the brain takes that feeling of closeness and carries it forward, reinforcing connection in subtle, unconscious ways. That morning kiss before you part ways, or that shared laugh under the sheets, acts as a kind of emotional buffer, protecting the relationship from the inevitable stress and friction of the outside world. And that's not just poetic, it's scientific. When oxytocin levels stay elevated, empathy increases, trust deepens, and even conflict resolution improves. So, morning intimacy isn't just pleasurable, it's protective. There's also something to be said about the psychology of light. When sunlight enters your eyes upon waking, it signals the brain to release serotonin, the mood regulating neurotransmitter. Serotonin not only improves your mood, enhances feelings of attachment and optimism. Combine that with physical closeness, and your brain essentially creates a cocktail of pleasure, calm, and connection. Morning sex then becomes less about lust and more about harmony, synchronization of body, mind, and emotion. And what's fascinating is that this timing effect doesn't just apply to couples, it applies to how we experience desire as individuals. Research shows that sexual desire is highly sensitive to context and mood. For many people, the morning represents calmness and renewal, a psychological reset that invites intimacy. It's a time when self perception is more positive, when our bodies feel more authentic, unfiltered by the pressures of appearance or performance. We're more accepting both of ourselves and of our partners. That acceptance, rooted in self compassion, is one of the cornerstones of satisfying sexual experiences. Morning intimacy also has unique physiological benefits. The combination of elevated testosterone and endorphins can boost energy levels, improve circulation, and elevate mood. Some studies even suggest it can strengthen the immune system. It's almost as if the body rewards connection with vitality, and for many people, that post intimacy glow, the relaxed confidence, the quiet satisfaction, translates into better focus and productivity. The brain, having already released a rush of dopamine and oxytocin, starts the day in a more balanced, positive state. You're calmer under stress, more empathetic in interactions, and more attuned to pleasure in small moments. But beyond the science, there's a deeper psychological narrative here, one about timing and trust. Morning intimacy often happens in the rawest state of being. Hair messy, faces unfiltered, breath imperfect. Yet it's in that imperfection that real intimacy thrives. Psychologists call this authentic exposure, the comfort to be fully seen without pretense. When someone desires you in that state, it signals something profound to the brain acceptance, and that acceptance can rewire emotional pathways, strengthening self-esteem and deepening relational security. It's not surprising, then, that couples who share consistent morning affection tend to show higher resilience in their relationships. It's not necessarily about sexual frequency, it's about emotional rhythm. The brain learns to associate mornings with safety, warmth, and affection. Over time, that association becomes part of the relationship's emotional architecture. Even on days when there's no physical intimacy, the simple act of waking up together can trigger a subconscious sense of connection. It's the psychology of ritual, a pattern that reinforces emotional stability. What's equally intriguing is how this timing interacts with gendered patterns of desire. Men's desire, often driven more by spontaneous arousal linked to hormonal peaks, tends to align naturally with morning physiology. Women's desire, meanwhile, is often more context dependent, linked to emotional closeness, safety, and stress levels. The morning, free from daily pressures, creates that perfect environment for desire to flourish on both ends of the spectrum. It bridges biological readiness with emotional receptivity. And when both align, intimacy becomes less about lust and more about communion, a merging of two emotional rhythms into one. Of course, not everyone experiences morning desire. For some, mornings are a rush of deadlines and caffeine. And that's important too. Context always matters. The psychology of desire isn't about Schultz, it's about alignment. Some people's circadian rhythms naturally favor evening intimacy when relaxation hormones like melatonin rise. The point isn't when connection happens, it's recognizing that timing carries meaning. When our bodies and emotions sync with the right moment, intimacy feels effortless. When they don't, it feels like work. What makes morning intimacy so interesting from a psychological perspective is that it embodies both spontaneity and ritual. It's spontaneous because it often happens without planning, driven by instinct. But it's also ritualistic because it repeats, creating a consistent emotional pattern. The brain loves patterns. It finds comfort in predictability. And predictable intimacy doesn't mean boring, it means secure. In relationships, security and novelty often compete. But in the right conditions, like the freshness of morning, they coexist beautifully. Another layer to this is sensory perception. The senses are heightened after sleep. Skin is warmer, nerve endings more responsive, and the olfactory system, our sense of smell is more sensitive. The scent of a partner, a trace of warmth, a familiar breath, all of these become powerful triggers for emotional memory. Smell, in particular, is directly linked to the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotion and memory. That's why the scent of a loved one can instantly evoke feelings of comfort, even safety. Morning intimacy taps into that ancient sensory language of love, one that words could never fully express. And then there's the mental aftermath, the lingering effect that psychologists call afterglow. Afterglow isn't just about satisfaction, it's about emotional reinforcement. It's the psychological residue of intimacy that keeps partners feeling connected long after the act itself. Studies show that this emotional afterglow can last up to 48 hours, influencing everything from mood to cooperation to attraction. When that afterglow begins the day, it becomes an emotional foundation, an invisible tether that quietly strengthens the relationship throughout the day. What's remarkable is how such a simple act, being close in the morning, can ripple through so many aspects of our psychological and physiological lives. It highlights how intertwined desire and, well, being really are. Intimacy isn't just something that happens between bodies, it's something that happens between minds, shaped by chemistry, memory, and emotion. And when it's timed right, it doesn't just satisfy, it transforms. Morning intimacy teaches us something profound about human sexuality, that timing isn't just logistical, it's emotional architecture. It shapes how we interpret closeness, how we feel about ourselves, and how we relate to the people we love. It's a reminder that our sexual selves aren't separate from our daily selves. They're part of the same rhythm, the same psychological ecosystem that defines who we are. So maybe that's the real beauty of morning desire. It's not just about pleasure, it's about connection in its purest form. It's the body saying, I'm here, before the mind rushes off into the noise of the day. It's the moment where biology meets emotion, where the chemistry of hormones becomes the chemistry of love. And perhaps that's why morning intimacy feels so special. It's not just about starting the day with passion, but with presence. It reminds us that the timing of touch can be just as powerful as the touch itself. And that sometimes the most meaningful moments of desire are the ones that greet us with the dawn